webinar of CCRI CSO. We are pretty excited to have you all. I'm just going to be very quick. My name is Tuğçe. Those who didn't met me yet, I will be managing, coordinating the support activities to pilots and fellows. And as you know, webinars are part of these group activities that we will organize regularly. And this is the first one. So welcome all. And I will just pass the floor to Victoria for a quick rules of the house today, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuğçe. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Victoria Wisa. I will be your technical host today. I will be managing the chat. So any question or comments that you have, you can use the chat function to interact with us. We will appreciate if you can keep your camera off during the presentations. Yeah, you're always welcome to raise your hand in case that you need to take the floor, but this is obviously a description of the moderators to giving the floor. We are using a Slido as an interaction tool for you to submit some answers to some questions that will come through along the webinar. You will have two ways to join Slido. You will see later on the screen a QR code that you can scan with your cell phone, or you can also join using slido.com and the token #CCRI. For your information, all the questions will be visible on the screen for all participants. We will be very interested in knowing who is replaying what. So that's why when you join Slido, you will see that you will be requested to identify yourself. So we will appreciate if you can put your name and organization or authority that you represent. But more important, as you can see on the screen, if you can put before your name an X, if you are representing a pilot or a fellow, or an O, if you're representing any other CCRI stakeholders. Also important for you to know that we are recording this webinar. For those that don't want to appear on the recording, we have addressed that individually, but it's important for you to know, don't switch on your camera because then you will be visible for all participants for the recording, and the same for the use of the chat and the Slido. So that's from the housekeeping rules. So give it back to my colleagues. Thank you.
So hello, good morning. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Pierre Menger. I am supporting the CCRI CSO in what is related to the laboratory activities. And I'm bit coordinating the content of the webinar today, which will be centered on the CCRI methodology. So this event today is really following two major objectives. It's one, informing you, because last week indeed we had a very short introduction in the CCRI first workshop, where we only give you an overview, very slight overview of the methodology. Today, the full 2 hours will be dedicated to present to you this methodology in more details. And then also an important block at the end will be to have a discussion around some specific questions that you will see on the Slido, but any other concern that you may have on the methodology, which you can comment via the chat. So basically, these are the two major blocks. You will see some interventions today from different people, also illustrating concrete cases to illustrate a bit what is the content of the methodology and not stay only on a very theoretical level. So having said that, I would like for us to present ourselves shortly to you so that you know who we are, what is our name and what is our function in the CCRI. So may I start with you, Marco?
Yeah. Thank you, Pierre. Well, I'm an economist, researcher, working together with Pierre in the development of the CCRI methodology and giving support to the laboratory activities. So the follow-on by order is Andrea.
Yeah, hello, thanks, Marco. Hello, everyone. So I'm working for the Coordination Support Office as project manager. Thanks.
Next.
Okay, I guess I'm next. My name is Ernest Kovac, and as a part of the CCRI CSO community and this laboratory in particular, I would be providing ad hoc expertise to pilots and fellows on various topics, mainly stakeholder engagement. And yeah, happy to be already contributing to this webinar.
Yeah, thank you. Alina?
Yes, thank you. So I'm here representing the, oh, I hear the echo. So representing the team who will share our experience on business case and funding.
Yanis?
Next, Yanis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yanis. I'm working on the self-assessment tool, and I'm happy to give a first overview on it today.
Okay, thank you. We have Elba.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Elba. I'm consultant on smart cities and digital transformation, and I will be supporting in the laboratory block with some pilots and fellows.
Okay, thank you. So just a remark, and as you all know, time is always a challenge in such short webinars, 2 hours, and the challenge is to maintain the agenda. So hopefully we will be able to do that. However, if there should be a lack of time at the end in the discussion, we can still imagine to connect or reconnect with you to collect further feedback via a survey, for example. So let's keep that in mind. Hopefully we won't need it, but maybe yes. So this is just for you to know. We can then start with the content of the webinar today. So I will give you a very short, let's say, introduction, which is a bit of what I have explained last week in the first workshop in Brussels. We need to know a little bit why are we actually here and talking about this methodology. I think we are at a crucial moment in terms of supporting and learning from the past experience and supporting what is to be done in the future in terms of circularity transitions at the local level. So we have on one side organizations that have done things in the past and others which do not have such a big experience. So there is already material available which has been used in terms of methodology from the past. And we want to take stock of this experience. And this is the moment, I think, to compile in one place methodologies, tools, principles, and create a kind of common language, a common understanding, what we would call a lingua franca, which is a language for us to communicate between the people, as I say, you have maybe already some experience from the past and currently in applying and following some methodologies, and others which are maybe a bit less experienced, as I said, and would like to connect now with us in the CCRI and follow us. So when we will be speaking about applying circular strategies, innovating, we should share at least a few sets of common words, language, and methods. So what is this methodology about? Well, it's basically a guidance document which should help support decision-making in order for local stakeholders to be able to implement circular systemic solutions, CSS. So what is behind this concept of CSS? You will find hopefully very soon when we will publish the methodology on our website that we are speaking here about some, let's say, principles. We can identify those 7 displayed on the left of the screen. We really want to help support local decision makers to implement this CSS because we want to go maybe a step beyond the purely, typical recycling project of one specific stream, but we want to integrate more dimensions, different sectors, different levels of territorial stakeholders, different dimensions of what is circularity. This is not only about, material flows. It goes beyond. It can touch issues of regulation, funding, and many others. It's about combining new circular economy business models, there are many of these, and these can be applied in parallel or in combination at the local level. We want to also to support the understanding of the system as a complex mix of many different aspects. So we want to promote a holistic approach, holistic assessment of what are possible solutions to transition towards circularity. And finally, but maybe not the highest priority, yes, we would like also then to promote innovations in these different fields. So for whom is this methodology thought? I may say I have two visions, maybe on the short term, and speaking in a language of the CCRI, I would say at the short term, we would like to exchange essentially with pilots and fellows, which will be those core actors who will interact with us, the CCRI, in the next, let's say, 2 years. But beyond that, when the CCRI activities will be over and the project will be ended, this methodology shall be of value for any local decision makers, be they private or public, also from academia. All those stakeholders that are involved in decision making at the local level should take value out of this methodology. So this is the bigger picture of who should be concerned by this methodology. Now, on the how question, we really intend this methodology to become, let's say, the central point. I do not want to say that we want to be the only point, but the central point when we have doubts about taking stock of past experience in methodologies, finding good practices in how to implement a specific tool, a specific approach. So there is this intention of this methodology to become some reference from now on in the future, but we do not mean that it should become prescriptive, but it should be the point where you know you can access and decide from there on if this is the best way to go forward, or if you can even suggest to aggregate more things to this methodology, because they would come from you as users, as practitioners with your experience, and you could say, hey, I think the methodology is lacking on such and such point, and I think I have a good experience and I could share it and I could improve this methodology. So there is this idea of not having a book on the shelf, but really an instrument that is alive, that will be evolving in the phase of CCRI development in the next 2.5 years, but only beyond. So this is the important value for you, I think. This is a tool which is meant to be there for your use, to consult, but also as a tool to be improved, upgraded with your help. So I think there is this kind of dual value for you. So hence, to summarize all these things about the methodology, we hope we have provided, or we will provide a tool that allows a tiered approach on decision making, not starting, looking on the details, but really going progressively from very generic information, more strategic level, towards more detailed. I said it should be modular. So this is not a methodology where we think you should go and follow by the letter from the beginning to the end. It could be that you would only need some parts here and there of the methodology on specific tools, on specific approaches. So we think this piece of work is actually a modular tool. It is, of course, informative, and we have compiled a lot of information already on past experience from the literature, from the practice, which we have collated and compiled in this methodology. It's not the end. We still have to improve that, hopefully with your help. And finally, it has a dynamic dimension. As I mentioned, we expect a lot of contributions from the practitioners at the beginning, from pilots and fellows, and later on more stakeholders. So altogether, these are the aspects that we think should bring value for users, for you, and should make this methodology really operational. So having said these strategic points on the methodology and why we are there, I may only now give you a few very light insights on major contents of this methodology, which is divided basically the document in 3 parts. The first part introduces the framework of the CCRI CSO and defines a few basic concepts. Part 2 will be the core of the methodology, which will be presented in more details after me by my colleague Marco. I will not insist now on this. And then we have a third party, which is more practical, where we have some technical fiches on either tools or CSS good practices. So where we can see some information on what has been done before in some other places. So we will also have more detailed insight on this fiche later on. So speaking about the first part, I will only display very shortly the chapters that we have in this part. We have the target groups definition, some reading guides, so to make this tool a bit more accessible for the reader and to find easily where should I go to find what I need. A very practical section. Then we have another section which is more on the circular economy issue in the EU context. So this is, I would say, general information on drivers and needs, EU policy frameworks, and some other issues like digitalization aspects that we have addressed. Then we have a section on the key stakeholders. I will pass on this. This is information for you, also showing for which stakeholders we are essentially targeting this methodology. And then we have the CCRI methodology genesis process. How did we create this methodology? Not out of the blue, but really you can find and track back on which existing material did we base the development of this methodology. From section 1, I immediately jump to section 3, where, as I say, we collate, we compile in the format of fiche. This is the structure of the fiche of circular systemic solutions. So later on, Elba will detail a bit further some examples on what you can find in this fiche. These fiche have, I think, a very high value in terms of making yourself more visible as a practitioner if you can share with us some practices, but also, of course, to get some information. Then we have also in the same spirit what we call technical fiche or fiche on tools, where we can find also in a very short format some information on specific approaches and tools that are mentioned in the development of the methodology. So from now on, what's next? This is today the starting point of an exchange between us, the CCRI, and you as future users and readers of this methodology. This is not the end. So from now on, we will start a series of interactions and feedback loops with you, not on a weekly basis, not on a monthly basis, but we can think of maybe half a year or a year for us to be able to improve this methodology content and its operationality based on your feedbacks. So this is really a work that we hope to do together with you in collaboration. And basically, that's it. For now, I think we have already a first question from Slido, which we can see. So to connect to Slido, you can either connect to the website using the internet, the web direction, or the QR code. So this is for us the first question. When you started with your let's say, transition processes at the local level, essentially if you are representing a city, a region, a pilot, a fellow, or a cluster, or based on your experience, did you use any methodological guidance or not? This is, of course, interesting for us because at least we would know, are we here suggesting something which is actually a demand or a need, or are we doing here something we guess not, something which has no demand. And I'm aware that you may not have been using a methodology as the one that we are developing, which is addressing, let's say, all aspects, which is compiling the full spectrum of very early assessment stages to more detailed assessments and specific tools. But you may have used methodological guidance for very specific aspects, only one or a few. So I see a majority has not been using methodological guidance in the past. This is very interesting. So I guess we have a market for our methodology, and there will be a demand. Yeah, this is I would say I'm a bit surprised. So it would be nice, of course, to know if those who have answered no, it's because they, as a practitioner and a local, let's say, decision maker, that they did use some other sources to go forward. We can discuss that later on in the debate at the end. So thanks for answering. We have 29 feedbacks, which is I don't know how much percent of the participants it means, but I think it doesn't move anymore. So we may close. I think we have a good idea now on this question. We may close and follow with the presentation. Thank you, Victoria.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. Now I will focus on the second part of the CCRI methodology, which is the core, let's say, of this document. Yeah, first of all, a brief overview of the structure of the methodology. This is organized in 3 different stages or phases, which somehow reflect this, let's say, the decision-making levels of circular systemic solution. The first one is mapping, which is related to the generation of knowledge on the territory. Then we have the design phase, in which we start, let's say, to take decision and building the circular systemic solution and selection of circular economy activities. And finally, the implementation phase, where we want to put into action the circular systemic solution and including the circular business model. For each phase, we try to organize, identify, describe, and provide guidance for each key area. In the mapping stage, we identify 3 main areas. The first one related with the policy and institutional framework, then urban metabolism, and finally stakeholder mapping. Then when it is about the design phase, we talk about the way on how to engage with the stakeholder, identification of action area, intervention area, and so on, the analysis of expected impacts of the circular systemic solution, and the definition of a monitoring system. And lastly, regarding the implementation phase, we distinguish it between the development of the business case and the identification of financing mechanism, and then the monitoring and the adoption of corrective measure when needed, and finally the reporting and communication. Then, beside, let's say, the descriptive contents of this stage and the key area, we try to do the methodology as operational as possible. So you can see on the left side a snapshot of the self-assessment tool, which will be a tool that user, pilot, and fellows can use to monitor the progress of circular systemic solution. And Yannis, our colleague, we will talk on it later on. On the right side, you can see that we introduced it at the beginning and at the end of each phase, kind of a checklist that the user, so decision maker, might use to quickly understand, check whether they are in this journey, whether they have missing something or everything has been addressed, and they can move on to the following stage. Then, last but not least, as Pierre said already before, we also provided some tool fiches, which provide some broader overview on the tools that can be used along this journey, and the circular systemic solution, which will be described by Elba. So at this point, I would like to ask another question which relates to your, let's say, the maturity of your circular systemic solution. So where your circular systemic solution is in this moment, based on your understanding of this mapping, design, and implementation phase, so that this will help us also to, let's say, elaborate further those areas in which you are currently.
Okay, so yeah, very active people in the Slido survey. Based on your experience, or your in what based on the methodology structure, on what stage do you say you are currently at? So there is also an option. Don't know. So it's an option. It might be surprising, but I can imagine that in some cases it's not so crystal clear if you are really in one or another stage. But I see mapping is still ahead, and implement. Interesting.
Nice,
okay.
Nice to see that they are quite balanced, the level of maturity of the circular systemic solution. I mean, yeah, now mapping is seems the most prevalent. Yep.
This question is also for us to see, and we can detail it later in the debate, of course, on which parts is there, let's say, potentially, I would say, a demand, or there could be a demand, at least at short term with our interaction with pilots and fellows, but also, and this is the occasion for us maybe to improve or increase, detail a bit more these stages, and also collecting feedback from other non-pilot and fellows, which is also interesting. Like I'm speaking about CCRI, project coordinators, associated partners, which are certainly involved in implementing local circular strategies. So I think it's there is a pretty nice balance between implement and map. Funny enough, the in-between stage of design is less mentioned here. So okay, we have 31 feedbacks. I think we can move on.
Okay, so let's go now with more detail on each phase and each key activities. So the mapping phase, as I said before, is the phase where we aim at generating knowledge on the territory, and we define these three main pillars. So knowledge on the institutional and policy framework, the metabolism of the territory, and finally the existing stakeholder. So going with order, why we dedicated the whole chapter to the policy framework? Well, this is very important because, first of all, local authorities do have a wide range of action when it is about circular economy. From, for example, the built environment spatial planning sector through circular procurement, circular criteria in public procurement. Then other sector might relate to waste and water management with regulation or even awareness campaign. And last but not least, also the business sector in which they may favor the company through platform collaboration or a business scheme. So a revision of what have been done in the past in this area, and what are the let's say the goal or the strategies of the region of city of region or city is very important, because at the last the circular systemic solution should try to align as much as possible with the regional strategies, overall regional strategies, because otherwise there might be the risk of a trade-off between the regional strategies and the circular systemic solution. And it is very important that since the beginning, the circular systemic solution should have the approval and the support of the policy arena, and also that the circular systemic solution should be, let's say, co-integrated within overall regional and city strategies. For example, how they contribute to SDGs goal or economic growth and so on. So that's why we introduced this first chapter, where we will provide some hints on how this review and identification might be done. Then the second chapter is on the analysis of the metabolism of the territory. I guess that this is the topic which you are most familiar with, as when we talk about circular economy, the urban metabolism is the mainstream topic. So urban metabolism is about the mapping of material flow and the stock within a region and city, and based on the availability of data, it can be at a more granular or less granular level. In the CCRI methodology, we aligned with the circular economy monitoring framework promoted by the European Commission. So we provide based on the 4 key areas: the production and consumption, waste management, secondary material, and competitiveness and innovation. We provided a kind of a list of indicators that should be used to analyze the baseline of a region or a city. And these indicators have been divided between basic, which should be those that should be available or easily estimable based on available statistics, and more advanced indicator, which required somehow some modeling expertise. On top of this, we also included additional indicator that should be used related to the circular economy state of implementation, the governance of the circular economy. And this relate mostly on the last OECD document of cities and regions circular economy. As we will see later, the baseline assessment and the use of this indicator is also operationalized within the self-assessment tool. So while in the CCRI methodology, we provide guidance on the use of with this indicator and an hint of the potential indicator, the user, then the reader, can directly use and monitor the evolution in the CCRI self-assessment tool. Now, I won't go into more detail in the metabolism flow analysis, as we have an interesting case studies from Amsterdam City that they used this approach to identify key area for intervention. And Andrea, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Yeah, indeed, we examine a couple of case studies for this mapping of resources at the local level, try to valorize them in a circular way. Amsterdam, they do present a case studies that is quite interesting. Of course, it's not the only one, but at least it's present in a very clear way. So in a nutshell, what they did and what they want to do, so basically is a picture of the material flow analysis, identify the sector that are really the most important, most promising, and with a higher environmental impact for circular economy, focus on this. And basically, I hope you can hear me. According to having identified this sector, then they introduce circular economy strategies per sector, and these strategies are quite well structured. So here is you have the picture that is a little bit confusing, but is very useful to see how energy, materials, minerals, biomass, and water are entering into the sector of household, industry, offices, and retail. And then they have the output in terms of emission, greenhouse gas emission, waste and wastewater also. And this is translated also into the processing. So that's a little bit the link with the circularity. If we see the next slide, it's a little bit simple because you can classify and identify the single sector. Now the picture is a little bit more clear. You see the input going into the sector, in this case is household, and then you have the outputs and then the processing side. So that's a little bit nice, I would say, representation of what are the resources and what are the area that the city are relevant. If you see the next slide, thanks. And as we said, basically they identify as a starting point. Yeah? And that's also what I personally like about this strategy. Let's identify on the hanging fruit, basically, or the most important sector, which in case of Amsterdam have been identified as construction, biomass included food system, and then try to design, having a clear vision, a clear strategy that also highlight the job creation, so the socio-economic impact, carbon emission for environment and material consumption, but also the economic value. For example, if you see the next slide, thanks. That's a little bit the case of the circular strategy on the biomass. We don't have to explain everything, of course. And you see they're touching upon cascading use of organic flows. So for materials, recycling, and valorization, I would say. They're very innovative for biorefinery hubs. So basically producing a little bit more than compost and biogas from these bioresources at the local level. Waste separation and logistics, which is crucial to have a pure or as much as possible high quality level of feedstock for then be recycled into something else. And a zoom on recovering nutrients, which are market-wise a quite interesting, let's say, area for bio-based economy. So last slide. That's a little bit a zoom on the, in my opinion, the most innovative part of it is like the biorefinery hub. You see that wastewater, sludge in principle, urine, organic waste, etc., are concentrated and processed into a biorefinery hub to create compost, but also proteins, algae, biogas, and then you produce basically all the products for agriculture, for different sector. That's the link between waste sector, local bioresources, and different value chain. But then what is interesting is down there. So they try to quantify as much as possible the potential in creating value, jobs, material saving, and then the link with the decarbonization, CO2 material reduction, or at least we avoid to have bio-waste creating methane and contributing to climate change, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. Indeed, a very interesting case from which we all of us can learn. As Amsterdam, I think, it has been one of the front runner in the circular economy all across Europe. Thank you. So now we have we have still the last let's say key area in the design phase, in the mapping phase, sorry, which is the analysis of existing stakeholder in the territory. So we try to emphasize very much in the CCRI methodology the importance of stakeholder engagement, because at the last, what we aim with the circular systemic solution is something that is really systemic. So it should involve as many as possible type of stakeholder and sectors. Okay. So in the design, in the mapping phase, we introduce several approaches to perform this analysis, and then we link the stakeholder engagement process all along the journey of the circular systemic solution implementation through a specific purple box in which we specify for each category of stakeholder what might be their role in fulfilling the activities on carry on specific activities. Then I think that now we will launch a question within the mapping phase in order to understand from your point of view what might be the most important, let's say, aspect in terms of knowledge. So the understanding of the territory and its metabolism, the understanding of the constellation of actors within the territory, or on the other end, the policy initiative, regional strategies carried out in the past, and what are the ambition of the policy arena for the future in order to align with the circular systemic solution. Then based on your responses in the future update of the CCRI methodology, we will provide to give you further practical guidance on how to delve in these aspects. And obviously, I just take this chance to say that all these aspects are strictly interrelated with each other. For example, stakeholder mapping could be done in parallel to the urban metabolism. So once that you identify the material flows and the key product value chain of the territory, you might then implement the system map, the stakeholder mapping based on the key product value chain. So while we tried for obviously practical reason to distinguish between these different areas, at the last they will always conducted somehow in parallel or integrated with each other. Okay, so I think that the urban metabolism, remain the most important part, followed by the stakeholder.
Okay, we will come back with this question 3, the future questions 4 and 5. We will come back and have maybe a chat on those 3 at the end in the panel discussion, because there is of course also an interest behind these questions for us. We don't have an opinion of it's good or bad to put urban metabolism before stakeholders. We need to know as developers of the methodology, where do we see that there is actually an interest, and where maybe we should a bit put more effort to flesh out in more details or with more examples some specific aspects. So that is a bit the idea behind this question. But again, question 4 and 5 will be a bit of the same nature, and we might treat them together in the panel discussion at the end. So we can follow with the flow of the presentation.
1 second. Okay, so let's go with the design phase. So in this phase, we try to focus on the building of the circular systemic solution. So how to prioritize intervention area, identify circular economy action, and estimate impacts of circular economy, circular system solution, and then targets and KPI. Since there is a wide, let's say, wide range of action of circular economy action, and on the one end, this might translate that the region and city may tailor the circular systemic solution to their need. It also might lead to the problem of create some very general, let's say, action plan or circular systemic solution. So it is very important to concretize expected impacts and the circular systemic solution. So as I said before, in the mapping phase, we try to map to the different existing stakeholder, and in the design phase, based on all the knowledge that we generated in the previous stage, we start to classify the stakeholder and start to engage with them based on strategic political questions. So who they are, what are the added value that can bring to the circular systemic solution, or how they can benefit from the circular systemic solution, and when they should intervene. So once that we start with this engagement process, it is important to put black onto white, so a document which we call stakeholder engagement plan. This document, in our view, should collect or describe the way in which the stakeholder engagement will be regulated within the circular systemic solution. So expressing roles and responsibilities and timing and so on. This document should be helped to consolidate the stakeholder engagement group, the regional stakeholder engagement group, which at the last should be those people who will take decisions and will then bring forward the circular systemic solution. We put this the engagement of the key stakeholder at the beginning of the design phase because we think that all the next steps from the identification of circular economy action, KPI, financing, should be co-defined within the regional stakeholder group, as they will touch upon different people. So now let's go with the most let's say technical parts, keeping in mind that this decision will be done within the regional stakeholder group. So the first objective is to identify the key intervention area or the sector. In the CCRI methodology, we try to promote the concept of product value chain instead of a sector or material flow, because we thought that it provides a more systemic approach, a more systemic view on the problem that a city or a region might have, and also because it is actually promoted by the last circular economy action plan from the European Commission, in which they have identified already 7 specific key product value chain that you can see right here. On top of that, if we talk about key product value chain, when we think about the circular systemic solution, we can already, let's say, position ourselves in a specific regulatory and financing framework, because each of them it is benefit from a specific program in which then when it comes to financing might be key. For example, the past Europe 2020 or the current Horizon Europe. So knowing in which your circular systemic solution is moving, in which product value chain, then will help to identify financing mechanism. Then, based on the mapping phase and the knowledge that we generated there, we should the methodology, let's say, support the identification of priority area at a crossroad based on 3 main principles. First of all, the magnitude or the volume of the material flow, so the bigger ones. Then in terms of impact, so not only in terms of volume, but also in terms of value created, in terms of environmental degradation reduced, or generation of socioeconomics impact. And then support from the stakeholder, from the local actors. So based on these elements, we should define, the regional stakeholder group should define the intervention area priority. When it lacks one of these, the circular systemic solution might have some barrier later. For example, the most easy one is the lack of support from key stakeholder. Then, once that we know which intervention area or sector we want to intervene, we have to think about what specific circular economy action is best tailored to the territory. And here there is a huge experience available. I mean, in the last 4 or 5 years have been created databases collecting hundreds of circular economy action or circular systemic solution. So in the CCRI methodology, we try to collect all these initiatives and provide you with the link to some of them in order to get inspired on the potential circular economy action that might fit your territory. Some of these might be the Circular City Scan tool, for example, from the Circolab for City program. Actually, in this moment, month, the Net Zero City project as well will publish a catalog of circular solution and co-benefits for net zero cities. And last but not least, I think in this moment in time, the bigger repository of circular economy solution is provided by the Knowledge Hub City Collection, developed by Circular Economy and ICLEI. And last but not least, within the CCRI methodology, we also provide a portfolio of circular systemic solution, which Pierre mentioned before, and Elba will present in detail later on. So now, once that we have the key product value chain identified, we know which kind of circular economy action we want to implement. The following step is about evaluating the expected outcome and impacts. So on the right side, you can see, let's say, the process of this evaluation that, in the mapping phase, we analyze the current situation and the future trends. Now, in the design phase, we should analyze how the circular systemic solution will impact the territory. So what are the expected outcome? And when we talk about outcome, we do not just refer to the change in the consumption of material or waste generation or recycling and so on. It is very important to link also to environmental environmental impacts, so emission, biodiversity, or a reduction of the use of primary material, because we have seen in the past that many times the goal was a reduction in recycling or a reduction in waste landfill, but or even in a circularity rate. But we should keep in mind that at the last, the final goal is to improve the socioeconomic situation or the environmental situation. So it is important to go a little beyond waste recycling circularity data and try to link LCA perspective to really understand what are the final impacts of this circular systemic solution. And so as a last step of the design phase, when we estimated potential impacts, it's also the time to define a KPI scoreboard. So establish key performance indicator, which will monitor, first of all, output. So what are the planned action for implementing the circular systemic solution and how they are evolving along time. Then outcome, by outcome, we consider specific directly measurable impacts like waste generation, recycling, employment, and so on. And then impacts. By impacts, we refer to those indirect, measurable through ancillary approach like cycle assessment impacts. This might be climate change, biodiversity, land use, or even inclusivity, and so on. And in the CCRI methodology, we also provide a KPI list that might be used or referenced as a starting point. I will not now go into the smart indicators as this, I think, easily understandable and quite common. So now I will leave the floor to Ernest that will provide us with a case studies for the city of Brussels, in which it is exemplified how the stakeholder engagement process was key for providing a systemic circular solution focused on the organization of football game, and how all the identification of key stakeholders through the key product value chain of football game was the driver of this circular systemic solution. Ernest, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, Marco, explained very well the background of what a stakeholder engagement looks like, and this is more or less exactly what we did within the Tackle project, which was a live project which ended this year in March. And so it's good to have all these background explanations, because I was not sure if I would be able to tell the entire story within within 5 minutes. But so yeah, so why football and why Brussels and why waste management? So I mean, football evolved a lot, and massive sports in general, stadium sports, etc. And very often, a football game in a stadium of more than 50,000 people can easily be looked at as a living city or a living kind of mid-sized town for a day, because of all the activities that are happening within the stadium perimeter, around the stadium, including mobility, including waste management, including energy consumption, water consumption. So all the things that are coming in and out, exactly like Andrea said, can be applied to this as well. And this is where the importance of different stakeholders is coming in, because different stakeholders are covering different activities, different level of responsibilities, active or passive participation and contribution to environmental impact, etc. And this is why we had to look at the football game as a living city and identify all the necessary stakeholders. On the next slide, I have something that would surely require an entire morning for itself, if not a day. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So yeah, so this is something that would surely require an entire day, an entire morning for going deeper into this. But what you were explaining already now, there were some smart people in the early 90s who kind of put all this together, and they gave a name to this kind of stakeholder engagement principle, and they called it communities of practice, which was for our project actually kind of really an enabler for finding solutions. So they defined in the 90s these communities of practice as a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So now if you click 2 more times, we will have the little circles there complete on the right. And these circles exactly explain what I just said. So for a successful stakeholder engagement within a communities of practice framework, we surely need a domain. So what do we want to deal with? The community, so relationship built through discussion, advices, and learning, and of course practice. So this is basically the knowledge base, the methods, the stories, the tools that are developed or already existing and belonging to different stakeholders. So this community, what this community does by working together, it really enables a lot of activities and solutions and ideas. So I just listed here a couple of those that applied to what we were doing within the project framework. Then the next slide will show basically the different stakeholders. So there was yes, of course, there was a mapping. There was first an audit. So then there was a mapping phase where we had to kind of identify all the different stakeholders who have a role in the waste management value chain, what we wanted to tackle. So there were a lot of different activities that we did. For this presentation, only focused on one, a very simple one, just installing a separate collection into in the stadium. But even for this, we required a lot of different stakeholders to be present to share their knowledge, because each of these here listed were responsible for different activities, and of course each of them had different knowledge base, tools, skills, etc. So what we had here was a mix of private entities, public authorities, as well as regional services for waste management, for cleanliness, environment, etc. And then in the next slide, which is actually the last one, of course, you can reach out to me and ask for the full report and the description of all these things. So what we did, so here you can see how a community of practice actually led to a very reasonable and meaningful set of different events, different phases, which led, and as you can see, each of these stakeholders that were kind of identified relevant for this particular activity, how they contributed to the final solution, the final result. And so it all happened, it all went well. And the overall result, you can see here certain numbers, what we achieved, the way it was presented to the city, who is the owner of the stadium. So it's not the Royal Belgian Football Association who owns the stadium, they have to rent it. So they can't really do any interventions within inside the stadium. So the result actually led to the city picking up from where we left, and completing the whole process by installing the separate collection scheme. So this is just a very simple, for these 5 minutes, yet very fruitful thing we did. And of course there are more. And yeah, so this is thanks to a stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Ernest. Very interesting indeed. Yeah, now I think that it is time for the question related to the design phase. Yep. So as we have done before, if you can please rate the importance from your point of view on these four different, let's say, key area. We will then take stock of your answers for the progress of this document.
This is, at least for now, it's interesting, the stakeholder engagement part, which is also, I think, in line, at least with the impression I got from the first workshop we had last week, at least in one of the groups I was involved. I remember our partners from Ireland and Finland, especially focusing on their expertise and the importance of the stakeholder engagement, which is apparently obvious. You need to have the compromise of the people, at least to start talking about problems and solutions. And there were some mentions in this case in the construction sector, where our colleagues from Ireland, I don't know if they are present today in the meeting, and from Finland were mentioning, I remember, expertise and experiences they had implemented in their respective local context. So I think now, again, we have about 30 answers on the question. I think we can more or less take it as a definitive response. Again, we come back to this all together with the previous question and the next one at the end in the panel discussion. So we can go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, so we are at the last, let's say, phase of the CCRI methodology, in which we have all the ingredients of the circular systemic solution, all the aspects that have been understood, and all the, let's say, key actors being engaged and active. They have an active role. So in this phase, we focus on the preparation for adoption, so the development of the business case, the business case for the circular systemic solution, and the financing, the identification of financing, and then the monitoring and evaluation of the evolution of the circular systemic solution, reporting and communicating. So first of all, I guess that this is one of the most important aspects for the success implementation of circular systemic solution, and this is about the financing and the development of a business case. So even if obviously this has to be thought or kept in mind since the definition of the circular systemic solution, we introduced the topic of financing in the implementation phase because we think that it should rely on a very defined and mature circular systemic solution, because it is really about the development of a business case. So if we are not sure about the players and the dynamic of the circular systemic solution, it will be rather difficult to argue or to demonstrate the financial viability of a circular systemic solution in the long run. So that is why we introduced this key area in the toward the last of the process, even if obviously it has to be kept in mind since the beginning. What is a business case for a circular systemic solution? Well, it is a document that if we have already performed all the previous key activities that we mentioned, it should be a document that is can be easily created. I mean, we provided in the CCRI methodology a template for this business case, circular systemic solution business case, which should collect, summarize the key actors of the circular systemic solution with their role and responsibility and how they intervene within the circular systemic solution, the type of resources and activities and the need of financing for these activities, the value and proposition of the circular systemic solution in terms of social, economic, and environmental impacts, and then all the dynamic of expenses and revenues generated by this circular systemic solution. So this document is very we think that it is key when it is about looking for financing from the public or private sector. And in that case, so when we talk about financing in the CCRI methodology, we distinguish between the typology, which might be public and private, and then the different type of financing. For each of them, we provided a brief description. This might span from debt, equity, guarantees, or crowdfunding, and so on. I will not spend now words on describing each of them, first of all, because I'm not an expert on this, and then because it will would take too much time. But just to let you know that in the CCRI methodology, we try to provide a description for each type of funding, and then linking the type of funding with the maturity of your circular systemic solution, because depending on the maturity, the type of financing might be might change. So whereas we have public funding more suitable for circular systemic solution at the R&D or a startup phase, on the other end, the private financing, so from the business sector, might be more indicated from those more mature. For this section, we rely mostly on the Circular City Funding Guide, which provide even more detail on this aspect. And obviously, if needed, we can delve more. Now, related to the business case and the financing mechanism, we have an interesting case studies, which will be presented by our colleague, Alina. Alina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you. So there are a couple of messages I wanted to pass on, so I hope I will be on time. And first, I'll start with the business case. So, of course, there are many benefits of going through all the various steps in the business case. But it's also important to bear in mind that it's not a one-off activity, and the business case really needs to be so constantly improved and updated as you progress with your circular systemic solution. And one reason why it's important is because, of course, this will allow the team who's working on the CSS to align on the value of it. But then also another reason why it's important is because at different stages of the process, the business case can also be a powerful tool to show this value, demonstrate it to different internal and external types of stakeholders. And this is exactly what I would like to show with an example. And the case is Rijkswaterstaat, which is a Dutch agency responsible for the main infrastructure, including the roads in Holland. So they have an ambition to change the service stations along the highways into so-called green and circular energy, water, and mobility hubs. So I'm talking about the areas where oftentimes people would stop by, maybe like to have a rest, for example. So they wanted really to explore how to seamlessly interconnect these areas with the road as well as with the regional environment. So for example, what kind of benefits it can offer to farmers and other types of stakeholders close by. So, but then they had a couple of obstacles. One was lack of clear focus. So they were not sure what type of functions the spaces can actually offer to different types of stakeholders. The second one was a lack of internal support from the management team. And finally, there was also a need to see what kind of funding strategies and opportunities they can use. So they worked on developing a high-level business case, and as part of the business case, they also worked on developing a preliminary business model approach, which really helped to see and identifying what's the role of the project owner, as well as what kind of functions the spaces can offer to different types of stakeholders, and based on this, also then to formulate to see what value they can really offer and formulate the value propositions towards different types of stakeholders. And they also, this exercise really helped to see then and really was like a starting point for a high level cost benefit analysis per function of the service station, which really helped to identify which functions of the service stations can be the most interesting and promising. So the outcomes of the exercise were really important. So on one hand side, they really helped them to identify these focus areas and focus of the project overall. It also helped them to tackle the internal resistance and obtain the support of management. And finally, that was also a starting point for their funding strategy. And now they're also in the process of applying for an Interreg grant. Next slide, please. So when talking specifically about funding strategy, I think there are two main messages which I would like to pass on, and also to demonstrate them with like very short examples. But first, a key and overarching message is that I'm sure, most of you already know, of course, that the funding landscape is very, complex with different types of instruments which are offered by different funding bodies, and they often have their own also, objectives and goals. So it's important to realize that most probably no CSS would fit into one type of instrument, and so. How to go about this? One way, in the first step, you could start dividing your CSS into parts and components, and really matching the objectives of each of those parts with the existing instruments. And one way of doing this, as you can see on the left side, is like using a temporal point of view along the innovation curve. So one example here is Contarina, which is a waste management company in Italy. So they wanted to develop and implement a new recycling approach for the nappies. And so the way they approached this was, I think, really a good example of this message. So they used research subsidies at the beginning. So later on, that followed by a pilot project funded via LIFE instrument. And then when the entire approach was already quite advanced, that also led to a successful application for a demonstration project funded by the Bio-Based Industries joint undertaking. So really looking at the components of the CSS, and checking how advanced they are, that would really help to see what kind of instruments you could apply for. And the second and my final message will be that appropriate instruments also would depend on the type of costs which are involved. And specifically, I'm talking here about the CAPEX, or for example, the costs like involving, the stakeholders and establishing the engagement with them. So a good example here is Atero, which is a Dutch company specializing in converting different types of waste into energy and other interesting products. So they have an approach for upcycling of plastic waste foil from the municipal solid waste. And they needed actually to invest in recycling installations. So they aligned their objectives with the LIFE program to actually get funding for this CAPEX costs. This was one, but then also they wanted really to go out and invest in the plastics reuse, value chain, and that's I think the type of cost which involves a lot of talking. So you go and interact with people, you establish different types of collaborations. So to cover these costs, they applied for a national scheme in Holland, which aims specifically to stimulate value chain interactions. And I'm going to finish here, so I hope that was clear. And with these examples, I really try to demonstrate that there are different types of schemes for different types of projects and purposes, and also the types of costs involved.
Thank you very much, Alina. Yeah, I take the chance also to say that in the CCRI methodology, we also try to provide an overview of the current financing scheme in Europe and how they might benefit circular cities or regions in bringing forward the circular systemic solution. So we did this exercise that we hope it might be useful, differentiated between, because it might be quite difficult for region and city navigate all the different European financing initiatives. So having said that, we have the last two aspects in the implementation phase, the one related with the monitoring, the evaluation, and the adoption of corrective measures when needed. This is basically the blue part in the circle, in which it is very important to, let's say, formalizing a process of evaluation over time, because for two reasons. Well, first of all, to see whether things are going as planned, but also because the experience that you have and the problem that you encounter then might be useful for other, and to not repeat the same problem, the same error. So it is very important to implement this process of evaluation and monitoring. And within the CCRI methodology, this is operationalized again with the self-assessment tool, which offer the opportunity to city and regions to really track the evolution of their circular systemic solution. Last but not least, the phase of reporting and communicate. I will be very brief on this, as we have behind of schedule, and I would just transmit two main aspects. First, reporting and communication is key for internal stakeholders, so within the territory, to guarantee the support of the key stakeholders. But not only. It should be also, there should be also communication towards external environment, so external stakeholders in the so-called transfer knowledge events, as those that, for example, will be launched by webinar through the task working group or within the laboratory activities. So in these events, it's very important that you are going to share your experience, and at the same time you get inspired from the experience of someone else. So cities and regions should take this chance to join these future events as export-oriented solution or import-oriented in the case they are looking for needs or some expertise from their peers. So when it is about reporting and communicate, we differentiate within the CCRI methodology internal communication for guaranteeing internal support from the key stakeholder, but also external communication in order to foster knowledge transfer and replicability of circular systemic solution. And this is all. Yeah. Now we will launch the last question regarding the implementation phase and the three main areas, which I guess I can already anticipate somehow the results. And then, yeah, we will then let the floor to Yanis for the presentation of the self-assessment tool.
Okay, I think this is what you were expecting, Marco. Yeah, not surprising. We have integrated this part in the methodology because, of course, this is the, let's say, the big trigger. I may also say something, well, maybe I should not, but it seems that the way we have integrated this aspect into the methodology, I think it's fine, but maybe there we can also think, because this has been commented on the first workshop we had last week, also on the funding aspect, namely commented by the EIB. We need to consider the funding aspect in maybe earlier stages, and not only when we are already well advanced in our, let's say, CSS design, and when we are almost with the machinery on the spot and try to start working, we then start to worry about, oh, and what about in 1 year time? I don't have so clear how will be this solution financially viable, or I need some more funding and I don't know yet how to do so. There is maybe this aspect to be taken into consideration even in earlier stages, and in collaboration with more, let's say, key stakeholders to support that. So having said that, I think we can close also this question. We will come back on this also again in the panel discussion at the end. And we leave the floor now to Yanis to give us an overview of the self-assessment tool.
Thank you, Pierre. So from the poll, I see that, of course, financing is a key issue, but I also saw that there are many interested in the aspect of monitoring. So I would like to provide you with a short overview of the self-assessment tool that we are currently working on. Marco already mentioned it several times before. It can be considered as one of the implementation or supporting or operationalization instruments of the CCRI methodology. So what is it for? What is its purpose? Pierre mentioned in the beginning that a key design principle of the methodology is to provide value for you. And the same applies also to the self-assessment tool. The goal is not to impose a standardized reporting system of any kind, but rather to provide a means for you that supports you in the implementation and helps to track progress and analyze the outcomes and impacts of the solutions that you apply. To make it more specific, there are 3 objectives. So there's of course a monitoring function for the implementation of the circular systemic solutions. So the tool is designed to help track progress towards certain targets that you define, to measure outputs, outcomes, and impacts of the solutions, and by doing that, to identify potential shortcomings on the way in the project implementation, and to identify spots that need to be elaborated further. Second, the tool is also about documenting the experiences that you as CCRI pilots are making. This is to allow learning from this experience, first learning for yourself, but also learning for others that can be inspired or followed from your actions. But also learning for us as the CCRI coordination and support office to learn, well, where are the key areas to look at, and how can we assist you in the best way. And thirdly, the tool is also about supporting the transfer of knowledge. So there's also a communication function, both internally in your region where the solutions are applied, but also externally to stakeholders that go beyond your region. Next slide, please. So what are the key parameters of the tool? There's, of course, a very strong connection to the methodology. This goes in both directions. So on the one hand, the tool shall help you to work at certain stages of the methodology. Marco pointed this out already. That is the analysis of the territorial metabolism in earlier stage in the mapping phase. Also, it relates to, of course, the definition of targets and indicators. And last but not least, the monitoring stage and evaluation of your solutions. But there's also a link back. The tool will also direct users to certain stages of the methodology in case there is a need to further elaborate certain aspects. And in that way, it will also relate to the knowledge repository that is developed in the CCRI to provide further guidance based on your assessment. What we identified as a key need for the tool is that it provides a high degree of flexibility because the solutions that you're working on and the regional context, the sectoral context can be very different. So there's no one size fits all approach. Of course, the standardized questionnaire with defined indicators would be easier to implement and would be easier than to compare regions to each other. But well, in the end, it's about providing you a means that really targets the topics and the issues that we are working on, and to allow for a tailored approach of measuring progress of your solution. Currently, we work on the beta version of the tool. We developed this beta version in an Microsoft Excel-based format. This will be then tested with you as pilots for its practicality. We are interested to learn how this helps you, how it can be improved, and how we can further elaborate this. And then also we test the practicality of the solution, and then we'll decide whether we will further improve this Excel-based version or we'll convert it to a web-based version that is then later also provided to other actors that are interested to use the tool. Next slide, please. So let's take a quick look at the setup of the tool. It is designed in a modular approach. It consists of 4 modules that reflect and connect to certain stages of the methodology, starting with a mapping of the regional context, regional circumstances. then an assessment of the current state of implementation of the systemic solution. And then in the next module, defining or identifying defining indicators and defining targets that you would like to reach with your projects and approaches. And then finally, it's of course about reporting. So tracking, putting or entering data on your progress, on your outcomes. And these results will then be visualized on a dashboard. And the tool will also provide further guidance based on the results. The tool is designed in such a way that it is considered that you will update this assessment regularly. For example, it can be once a year. It should be done at least once a year, but it can also be more frequently. In case, well, you made a key step forward in a certain area, or you have new data available, for example. So then this can also be a good point of time to update the assessment. As I said, we are currently working on the beta version, and we plan to complete it by the end of the year. So in the beginning of next year, we will approach you with the solution and invite you to test it and try it. And then we will get in contact with you to collect your feedback, discuss the use of the tool, and with that information, we will further work on the tool and improve it. So this was a quick glance at the tool, and then I will hand over back to Marco, I think.
Thanks, Yanis. Very interesting indeed. And I think that now we should, why does it? Okay.
Yes, we, may I say, in relation to the agenda, we are behind schedule, and but I think this is an important part for you to understand what's in the methodology. We had foreseen now a series of question and answer. I would kindly suggest to you, maybe we switch that, as we have been, I would say, active in the chat, and I have been responding to some questions already. So let's assume we have done a few series of questions and answer, and please, I would suggest we take further questions and answer to the panel discussion or the discussion at the end. And we continue now with what would be the last intervention from our side, with Elba presenting you a bit of the basics of what we see there under the fact sheet for circular systemic solutions.
Thank you very much, Pierre and Marco. I will try to go quickly because I imagine that everyone is already looking forward for the discussion. So just if we can go to the next slide, please. So as already Pierre and Marco have been mentioning in previous slides, the methodology also includes this circular systemic solutions portfolio. It is a block in the report which provides some detailed descriptions, examples, and reference on systemic solutions, circular systemic solutions that have been implemented. We think that it is quite interesting to provide this research because it provides examples and ideas for others. So it can be quite interesting for cities and regions that are still in a design phase or mapping or thinking about alternatives to get ideas and to see what have been done, what is in the process of being researched. And also it can show how one concept or one approach to a systemic solution has been implemented through the examples that are provided. Also, these pieces can be interesting for the different cities and regions to identify partners, so you can see who is been working on things similar to the ones that you are considering. So then you can see the degree to which they have been developing it, where new resources, etc. And also We think it is an interesting resource to see concrete implementation examples, not also on how an idea on a systemic solution is being implemented, but also in the cases where you can already see examples of cities that have been doing that, which have been the results. And you can also see a little bit which have been to which extent it has been implemented or not, or which problems or solutions they have found. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So very quickly, these fact sheets have been structured following the value chains defined in the EU Circular Economy Action Plan and the ones that already Marco presented at the beginning. So we are following the same structure as the whole methodology, so it is easier for all the readers to follow this up. So the value chains really aim to create this value across all the stages of the product's life cycle and all the activities that are adding value, from the business models to the education, and we try to cover all these different elements in the circular solutions. So these are you can see in the screen these different value chains, and moreover, besides this value chains, we have added one specific section on cross-cutting and governance systemic solutions. And this would be like more horizontal practices or approaches or activities that can actually be useful for different types of value chains. So for instance, how to build an inclusive circular economy strategy involving different stakeholders, creating clusters that can help to generate these value chains and synergies between the stakeholders, circular procurement practices that can be done in a multiplicity of sectors and value chains, etc. So in this section, you can find like inspiration of practices that can be quite useful for different sectors. In this blog, we also include this reading guide that is presented before the fishes themselves, and it explains a little bit which is the reference across the methodology document that has been used for some of the labelings that are used in the fish. So, for instance, the type of a strategy, or to which level, governance level it is useful, or what do the different stars in the stakeholder engagement or financial effort are used. So in any case, there's also always a reference to other documents or existing classifications that are explained here for the use of the different fact sheets. If we can go to the third slide, please, and then we present a little bit one of the fact sheets. For instance, this is one of the examples among these 18 fishes about circular systemic solutions. This one is specifically on the construction and demolition sector, on how to create urban resource cadasters and material exchange systems. At the beginning, we present the concept of this circular systemic solution. So specifically, this one would consist in progressively creating a mechanism to register the available materials for construction and demolition, and then from a mapping to be evolving more to a mechanism to exchange these different materials. And this is the concept of the systemic solution. Then we go to the resources and preconditions that are necessary to implement, and it's just the highlight of which are the main elements that need to be considered at this stage, or just some hints on which are the main things to be thinking about when you are designing the solution. So for instance, we cover the context, which is often regarding more governance aspects such as regulation, policy, existing classification, for instance, in this case of the materials, the existence of networks with other cities that are doing something similar for the sustainability. So it's more intangibles or things more linked to institutional elements that will enable or allow this solution to happen. Then the material elements, which will be more linked to infrastructure. For instance, if you need like a storage or logistic facilities as you move forward and in implementing this solution, and you go more to storing these materials or changing them. And then technical, more related to which are the preconditions or the technical resources or knowledge that is necessary to implement this solution. So for instance, it requires a lot of knowledge about which are the materials, how to classify them, which are existing classifications. You also need a digital infrastructure or system that allows to gather all this information, change it, visualize it, and that can support progressively the implementation of this solution. On the side, you see that also there are like some of the labels that are also explained in the reading guide. So which type of a strategy is it? The technology readiness level, which I think that several might be already familiar, but the higher it is, it means that the solution is more mature and that you can probably find like more examples, or the technology itself used or the methodology has been more tested and proved and is already quite normal. And the lower it is, it means that it's more experimental and there's still in a piloting phase or validation phase. Financial effort from the solutions that need less effort because maybe they are less intensive in infrastructure to solutions that need to consider an important investment. And I think that this is also important to consider in some of the areas that have been explained before for the business plan, how to get the funding. So this is some of the information that can also give some hints on how to build or design or think about future sustainability. Stakeholder engagement, the same. So some solutions need less stakeholder engagement precisely because they are quite focused on how the city is organizing it. Some others really need that the stakeholders are super participating and changing their habits. And all these classifications are explained also in the reading guide. Types of territory. So we also make a small recommendation, or more than recommendation, we explain in which levels of governance this might work better. So at city level, but probably more at metropolitan, province and region, precisely because for specifically this practice, it is interesting that you can exchange materials or information with beyond the city itself. And then the sectors involved, which are the main economic sectors or stakeholders from some of these sectors that you want to involve. For each CSS fact sheet, we also provide this insight on the stakeholders. Let's say that here it is identified which would be the key or the first stakeholders that it would be natural to engage in this stakeholder engagement plan that was mentioned before. And specifically in this case, it would be construction companies that will need to be engaged, the different city departments that somehow are working with construction and work permits, etc. And these are the main stakeholders that you need to engage from the start in the design of your initiative to make sure that they are participating, that you take into consideration their needs, their capacities, etc. For each example, we also provide this impact section, so which would be the main impacts that could be expected and from the implementation of these solutions, and which could be some of the barriers and risks for the implementation of the solution. So, for instance, in this case, it is there are some materials that probably require some treatment or some processing before being reused. So how to do this exchange between construction sites, or how to quantify or how to follow the track of these materials can be a bit more challenging than for some others. And also one of the main barriers for the sustainability and the correct functioning of this solution would be the existence of a network of other cities, or the capacity to exchange and integrate in the system other cities or go beyond the urban level, because it's very difficult that the timing from the different construction sites and the needs just within a city are complementary enough to make the most of this system. So this would be all the information related to the solution itself, to the approach. And then for each solution, we provide several examples of cities or regions that have already implemented this solution to a certain extent. So in this case, for instance, we have in Helsinki, in Finland, they already created system, the mass coordinating group that they call it, which is precisely how to collect data on materials. They create the system to collect data about some of the land masses that are used in construction, precisely to avoid buying land masses or getting new land masses and using the ones that are already being used in other construction sites. So they began to create this material flow specifically with land masses in the city, and they already created one system. So it's on just one material, but already a very interesting practice. Another example would be the CREATE project, which is just the starting and is a net funded project involving several cities. And for instance, they are developing now a system on how to register and keep track and visualize the different materials that are generated in different construction sites so that they can be changed in the city. So they are already building some classification and some IT structure to support it, etc. And for each of these examples, there are also some references to the official website or to some specific analysis about this use case, so you can get more information. So this would be just one example. We invite you to consult the others, and in the future we will also be asking pilots and fellows if they want to share their examples, and it would be a really good way of also giving visibility to whatever you are doing, to enriching all this repository with best practices, with new ideas, new barriers that you have found, and solutions to these barriers, and also to give to get some visibility within the community, because I think that this is a really good resource to find partners and inspiration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for sharing the content of what we have been developing in this first year of the CCRI existence. Now, finally, we have the time to have a chat. I would suggest we skip the break. We are all, I'm with some energy left, so we can assume that we can have a discussion until hopefully everybody can stay in the room until maybe 12:40. So we will go 10 minutes beyond the previous or scheduled time. Because we would like now to have also your impressions. And maybe I would like to ask to Victoria to come back and show very quickly the results of question 3, 4, and 5, where we were asking you about your interest on different, let's say, thematic areas in the different phases. So related to this, I think, and also considering the fact that you have been mentioning that most of you have not yet used typically methodological backgrounds or guidances, but you have interest on these areas. What is your first impression? I would like to know, having seen the content of the methodology and given the fact that you haven't been using methodologies in the past, you have this interest on these thematic areas. Do you think the methodology as it stands for now is something that you would consider as useful for you and you would be using to get access to knowledge, access to experience? I would like to hear a bit from you, your first impressions in this sense. The floor is yours. Please, when you speak, just explain who you are and. For example, I saw that in the chat there was a question on I think it was related on the urban metabolism, the capacity of the tool to show circularity, let's say, at the local level. So I would like to ask, for example, in the area of assessing the situation with tools that will help to assess the urban metabolism. Did you have in this sense or in another area clear where to go and find some guidance on how to start that? How did you proceed, or what is your intention to do so given the situation, imagine that a methodology would not be there, a CCRI methodology would not exist. What was your experience in the past? How did you start moving yourself to get to know more experience or more knowledge on these areas? Urban metabolism is one, stakeholder engagement is another one, and so on and so forth. All the other thematic areas we have been addressing in the different phases. How did you get information, knowledge, know-how on this? Don't be don't be afraid.
I can just provide some hints on the question. I couldn't see the question in the chat because I was in the presenting mode. But if I understood well, if the data available at the local city provide enough evidence on the circularity, right, Pierre? It was the question.
Like that, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the availability of data at the local and regional level is the tricky point, let's say, for doing a metabolism analysis at so granular level. But yeah, in some cases, when obviously data are available, we can start with that, and we can even the circular systemic solution might foresee an aspect for improving the data situation of a region or a city. Okay. On the other end, when there are no data and no evidence on what's going on at the city or regional level, there are kind of effective approaches to provide estimate based on national statistics. I mean, at the country level, there is a very detailed overview of material flows thanks to the Eurostat and the European Commission work. And this data through downscaling method, which rely on the context of the region and city, so taking into account the population, the type of economy, the type of the territory. So these approaches are able to estimate what are the material flow at the local level. Okay. It requires some modeling expertise, obviously, but is an efficient way to deal with lack of data. So that is a good starting point. We describe this in the methodology, providing reference to these approaches that the cities and region can use for having a first evidence on what's going on in the territory, in the city, and they can obviously improved as much as possible, depending on resources and willingness also to do this type of activities.
Okay, this is one specific addition on this question. I don't know if the person who was behind the question wants to comment or ask any further compliment on this. So as to the previous question, which was about your experience or your difficulties to get access in one place, I think this is a gap which I think I'm convinced the CCRI is filling with proposing a methodology like we do today, because to find in one place all this, let's say, guidance from very early stages of designing a circularity strategy at the local level until the very end of the chain, which is implementing and trying to design also the funding scheme. We hope that bringing all this together in one place will be of use, because to me it seems that in the past, yes, there was certainly some guidance even provided by projects or by other organizations, but maybe the information was split here and there, and not everybody had an idea on where to go and seek for information. But this is really an intention of the CCRI, and the methodology is really to provide a central point for you to get access to whatever you need. So if there is no more to be commented on this, if you don't have any more things to comment, please feel free to comment if you still want. Otherwise, I would go to the next evaluation and also concern of this group of people we are here today to present you the methodology, which is from now on we have to go forward. We want to improve this methodology with more information, with more details, with additional fact sheets like Elba has just presented one, or information on tools. So now we would like to know how, as a CCRI team, we could improve that. I think we have essentially two major means to do so. We can continue to provide ourselves more content in the methodology. We will look for more practical examples. We can improve the methodology, let's say, the document, and we can do it from an office work, and then we can come up in 1 year to you and say, okay, now we have upgraded the methodology, and this is now what you have, updated information. Another mean would be to, and this is, I think, also the meaning of the CCRI is to provoke exchange between the practitioners, which is the community with whom we are dealing here, the pilots, the fellows, the associated partners within the CCRI, and the CCRI project coordinators and projects, which have also their experience of good practice around methodological instruments or tools, and CSS practical cases. So as future users of such a methodology, I would like to know in which kind of approach do you believe it would bring you most value? Do you see also value for you in getting involved, exchanging directly with those having good experience in a specific area? Or do you think, just having the content of a guidance in a document is fine for me? Well, I would like to listen from you. What is the type of content and means of doing which you would more value in the coming 2 years? So this question is, of course, more addressed maybe to pilots and fellows who are present today in the room, because this is with you that we will exchange on this. So I'm happy to listen to your wishes in that sense. Yes, Elmar Willems. He raised his hand. Please feel free.
I'm trying to connect the camera as well, but yes, there we are.
Yes,
no, it indeed, there is a comment also by Cheryl Robb that the methodology looks great. But of course, there is also a trade-off between all the exercises that you would need to do and the time that you put into it, and the results that you might have. So I think, for example, with the issue of metabolic analysis, for example, or stakeholder overview and mapping, it needs to be, feasible. So the theory of the methodology looks really great and encompassing, really complete picture of everything that we should do. But I also know from experience that, for example, working with metabolism is quite time consuming, and then you really should, look into the value and the added value of it, or maybe you can just work with some broader figures and not try to get the details right, but you got to focus on the real action and on the progress in the general sense. So for me, it will help to align the ideas that we have and to put them into practice, and to have a systematic approach. At the same time, I think we'll definitely have to make choices about and reflect on what aspects are we going to dig into more in detail, and what aspects of the methodology will we leave behind a bit, or are we going to neglect to a certain extent. This is just a comment from a practitioner perspective that is also informed by all those cities and municipalities that we work with, and they are, assuring us that there's so much to do, and that they really have to find, spare time, and that's hard to find these days. So this is something that will definitely help, but it also needs to be balanced with all the capacity that's not there or is there, but it's hard to activate everyone.
I think your first intervention, first big comment to the point, which is this methodology indeed tries to provide all the things you should consider if you want to be, like the Amsterdam case, they sell themselves as fact-based decision making. So yes, you would like to say or to pretend we have done a very detailed metabolism analysis, and of course this takes time. So it's always a question of case by case, the situation. Do the stakeholders in a case accept that they will spend a year and money on this to get out some kind of additional information which they may find of very high value, or they may find some of them, well, okay, we could have done without also, but then maybe our decision-making process is less fact-based and it's more policy-based, or let's say based on economic interest, which is fine. And in that sense, the methodology we provide in the CCRI, as we insisted on the beginning, is not prescriptive. We say what could be done in order to really be transparent, progressive, fact-based, and try to reach by the end a consensus of as many parts as possible and a holistic approach. So yes, it will be case-by-case decision to see if something will be developed as we suggest in the methodology or not. The fact is that they need to agree on that way of doing. I think that's the trigger. But the point. I don't know if anybody else wants to react on this in the chat. I don't see any raised hands. Someone called Martin Snyder says he would like to give some reflection. So yes, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'm not a representative of a pilot or a fellow. I'm with the circular economy community, and as such, in the role of associate partner.
Yes.
So if that's okay. And secondly, I'd like to congratulate you with all these very valuable presentations. The methodology as it is presented, resonates a lot within EIT Climate Kick. Well, I see a lot of alignments, so to say, in the methodology, where we implement it, well, say, both on cities levels as well as on regions and even on countries level. Now, the reflections I'd like to give are just based on what I hear today, and maybe it is already within your methodology, but if not, it could be useful also for future development. To start with, a general question about the dynamics of the methodology, and that specifically refers to say the measuring, the evaluation, and the learning part with it. I say this because when we implement our methodology, we do it in an iterative way, yes, because we realize that, say, the underlying assumptions on which, say, the strategy has been developed, those underlying assumptions might make sense in the beginning, but by implementing, we find with measurements and evaluation that some work and some underlying assumptions might be reconsidered. Yes. So what we do is go through different kind of a number of iterations in this process. Yes, and that also creates a dynamic, and also does not necessarily mean that the KPIs as defined in the early stages will necessarily be the end result at the end of the whole process. So my question for this part is the extent to which is say the dynamic involved in going through this whole journey implemented in the design of this methodology. That is my first question, or reflection. The second one is the extent to which some kind of governance model is also part of the methodology. Yeah, because what we see is, and it also depends on the size of a project, be it on a smaller city scale or larger regions, or even larger country scale. What we do see is the need for some kind of governance, where all the key stakeholders are having a seat in, and more or less have a say in the strategy, in the implementation, or to reflect on what is going on. So my second question is some kind of governance also incorporated in this methodology?
Okay.
And I have a third question, but this is already big enough, I think, to to further reflect upon.
Try to be short, as I see also to give a short answer. I see there are hands raised. I don't know if the hand raised by Alessandro Pensa is supposed to be in. Yes? You want to answer this, Alessandro?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alessandro Pensa. I'm from Pilot participant, which is municipality of Capannori in Italy, north of Tuscany. So just to say briefly that I really appreciated this presentation and methodology. We had experience here in Capannori, especially on stakeholder engagement mapping of territory, which basically is what we often do in many projects, also on civic participation. So I really appreciate it. And I personally voted for urban metabolism because I honestly, it's something that it's really interesting. I don't really know too much about that, so I think it could be really interesting to know a little bit more. And also I appreciated a lot this methodology. I think it could be interesting really for us to get more into this as a really complex that take into account all the different phases of implementing a solution on a territory. So basically just want to say this, and also as a pilot, our solution is based on waste management, so we on separate collection and resources management. So we are also really available and happy to share and to exchange our experience. So we into this circular city network. So
thank you, Alessandro. I see also a comment of Nina Wolf, which is related with the comment and question that was raised by Martin Snyder. So I may want to go back shortly on the first part, the iterative spirit of any kind of implementation or designed for implementing CSS. Maybe we have not been clear enough. It might seem indeed that the let's say the methodology suggests a kind of linear process. That might be the impression, but indeed all the contrary. That's also why we have designed all the graphical communication around the methodology is a circle. Yes, so we are very much aware that you can either jump in the methodology to say jump in the map phase and then go through the different stages, and you may indeed be conscious in the second stage, design, that oh, we haven't considered a very important stakeholder group because it has been suggested now by an economic partner, and indeed we did not consider this stakeholder group. So let's go back and see what are, let's say, the interests and involve these people or this group of stakeholders also in the discussion. So you go back, you integrate them, and then again you go forward. It's a constant iterative process, or should be at least. And this is also what we have tried to, when you will see the methodology in its complete, let's say, extension, the document, I think this, hopefully the spirit will be transmitted to the reader, because indeed we did not think of a linear process. You start, you go to the end, you use the self-assessment tool, and then you realize, oh no, I have to go back to the beginning and start again. No, these feedback loops are suggested at any stage of the process, as Yanis has shown. On the circle we have on the methodology, the self-assessment tool really considers all the different stages of the methodology and is connected with the methodology. So in this sense, I think we are online, and it must be an iterative process. Concerning the governance, I'm not sure I remember exactly the question, but there is some specific, again, guidance, which is nothing more than suggestions on what you can do. Again, in order to avoid bad surprises at one stage, meaning that if you don't have the right group of people taking decisions to implement any kind of solutions, then your solution might not be accepted and might be rejected, at least by a part of the impacted, let's say, group of stakeholders. So again, the governance part is an integral part of the methodology. I would also add it's present across the different sections of or the 3 phases, which I think has been also presented by Marco. So again, I think this is in the same spirit. Governance should be made progressive and iterative. This is not a linear process neither. And in this sense, I don't know, Marco, if you wanted to add something else on these issues?
No, actually, I think that this is a good point to address in the further elaboration of the CCRI methodology, because we just, in the current version, elaborated a bit on the type of stakeholder, on the moment in which they should be involved in the process, and what their role might be, but not that much on the dynamic and on the governance model of the project. So that aspect is something that we should for sure address and delve into it in the next version of the CCRI methodology. Also taking stock of what will happen in the pilot and fellows experience. Now, I think that we have still 3 pending questions for the pilot and city that they would be very useful for us for taking stock of their needs. So I would suggest to go to those questions, because otherwise the people start to leave
Questions
because we are running out of time.
Yeah,
we are already.
Yeah, this is really for us. This the question 6 and the following question 7 is trying to map what are, let's say, the offer and the demand for specific aspects that are highlighted in the methodology. So now that you have a clear understanding of the methodology's contents, for which thematic areas in the 3 phases, across the 3 phases, would you be able to share your expertise with third parties? If we are thinking in a peer-to-peer relation between a city or a region, a cluster which has, you know, more experience in the field, and they would be ready through the methodology to exchange their experience or know-how with other pilots or fellows that are less experienced in this area. So if you feel yes, comfortable to say something around this, where in which of these fields do you feel you can say you could share your expertise with others without any compromise? Please consider this is only for us indicative, and also, I mean, to see how we could focus the future activities around these contents of the methodology. Okay, 7 have answered. I hope, I guess, these are essentially all pilots or fellows, but of course, if any other, for example, associated partner, which could have quite a lot of expertise in one of these areas, is also comfortable with, or the idea of being able to share in whatever form their knowledge in these areas, please welcome to answer also. So we have stakeholder engagement, CSS design, as yeah, 10 answers, maybe a few more seconds to give your feedback on this. And then we go to the, let's say, the opposite question, which would be, okay. Stakeholder engagement. Okay, maybe we should cut this question and go to question number 7, which is exactly the same topics, the same thematic areas, but in this case, who of you would be needing, let's say, more support in these areas? The combination of this question with the previous one, of course, you saw it, is for us maybe to identify an eventual matchmaking between those pilots and fellows who are able to provide something and those pilots and fellows who would be willing to get support from first-hand practitioners. Okay, this is not a match. This is not a match. So the needs are apparently quite different in comparison to the offer. Impact assessment, very in front of the others. Financing, of course, always there. Target system, which is somehow linked with the impact assessment, and much less on stakeholder engagement. Okay, so we will treat this information and see how we can maybe also find some, with detailing a bit the feedback we receive from you, to see if a pilot and another pilot, or a fellow and a pilot, could find some kind of matchmaking between a need and an offer. So we will come back on this with those concerned. Without losing any more time, we have one last question, and which is also very important for us. Where do you believe is the major value that the use of the CCRI methodology brings to your case? So we have different options. Is it just yet another, let's say, document which will offer general cultural knowledge, which you may consult? Do you think in a first, let's say, understanding, it will bring operational knowledge and know-how, which you can use directly, more or less? Visibility, this needs maybe a bit of explanation. As we have said, we are proposing fact sheets on methods, fact sheets on tools, and we would like you to become, let's say, the active part to suggest and to propose to integrate fact sheets in the methodology. So this is also an opportunity for you to become visible through the methodology, which will be made public. So hence, today we saw, for example, the example of urban metabolism by the city of Amsterdam. In this sense, I may say, okay, for now, Amsterdam figures maybe in our methodology as one city with good practice in this area. And I think it's very important also that the methodology becomes an instrument for you practitioners to become more visible as good practitioners in some areas. So let's go there on the results. You see a lot of value in connecting with third parties. Yes, that's a good one with the CSS portfolio. I think this is indeed one of the added values that we pretended to provide with this methodology. Operationality of the process is, of course,
the second one.
The second one. So we are happy with this feedback. This is indeed what we need to achieve. This needs to be, and this has been commented also by I think it was Nina Wolf in the chat, that instead of getting more in the details of what does a specific method consist in, we should care maybe more, or at least at the same level, into the operationality of this methodology. So make it really readable, and maybe also providing in a progressive way the information, maybe with adding links on further information, and getting also only to the methodology the basic information. Okay, I think we should not take much more of your time. I will just end the webinar with some concluding words. If we can have, from now on, the interaction with the methodology will take place, and we can get additional feedbacks with several different means, which are displayed now on the screen. With the tailored support we will provide to the pilots, we will have a very dedicated support for the pilots to implement their CSS, and of course, by doing so, we will also have exchanges, we will see, with them on the methodology, and they will make their comments of maybe improvements to be done on the methodology. So this is one mean for us to improve the methodology. Another is the events that we will have over the next 2 years, webinars and thematic working groups, where eventually the issue of the methodology may be raised. So this is also a channel where you will have the occasion, as pilots, as fellows, as associated partners, CCRI projects, and other stakeholders, to give your let's say, your feedback on the methodology. And finally, there is the help desk via the CCRI webpage, where you can also drop maybe some comments and issues you would like to raise in relation to the methodology. So the story only begins. This is a timeline where you can see that these actions will be running for the next 2 years, starting from 2023, reaching up to the beginning of 2025. So this is only the beginning of the process, as I say. and we look forward to getting your feedback. Now, I'm conscious that we did not have time to address and to discuss maybe in all the details we would have liked with you today. I would suggest that we will send out to the participants of today a small survey which will come back to the major questions we have raised today. And you will have the opportunity in this survey maybe to also write down in a few lines what are your thoughts and suggestions on the things that you have seen today. So having said that, I would close the webinar. Thank you very much for having been here. I'm looking really forward to exchanging with you on the development of this methodology, and I hope we'll keep in touch. So thank you very much to all the presenters also, and to the participants, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.